Hey developers, in our previous episode we saw how to create a string and concatenate a string. But what if we want to take input from the user? So now let's suppose we want to take name as a input from the user. So let's type what is your name. When we run a program, it is just printing what is your name. Here there is no way for the user to enter the data. This is because we are using print function. And the work of print function is to just print in terminal or console. If we want to take the input from the user, we use input function. Input function looks similar to print function, but instead of print, we will type input. We have opening parenthesis and closing parenthesis. And inside the opening parenthesis and closing parenthesis, we have double quotes. Inside the double quote, we have prompt. Prompt is nothing but we are giving a hint to the user that they have to enter this type of data. This data can be name, address, age, etc. When we run a program, here it is asking for the name, and this time it feels like the cursor has stopped, but the program is still running and it is waiting for the user to enter the data. In our case, we are asking for the name, so now let's enter the name. Here, nothing will happen. This is because the data that we have entered is just getting replaced with this part of the code. Now let's print the data that we get from the user. So here we will do is that we will nest one function inside the another function. And let's concatenate the data that we get from the user with the hello, which is a string. So when we run a program, it is asking for the name. So now let's enter the name. Now let's understand what happened over here. When we entered our name, the name got replaced with this part of the code, and the data that we have entered is concatenated with hello. And we have printed this both in the terminal. As a result, we got hello Dyro Dev. Here, hello is a string and Dyro Dev is a data that we have entered. In Python, we can store the data that we get from the user. And for storing the data that we get from the user, we use variable. Variable works as a container in which we can store the data. Don't get confused because we are going to cover it in our upcoming episodes. So now let's try to store the data that we get from the user. So here, name is a variable, and inside the variable, we will store the data that we get from the user. So now let's run the program. When we run a program, it is asking for the name. So now let's enter the name. Here nothing will happen. This is because the data that we have entered is getting replaced with this part of the code. And this part of the code is getting stored inside the name variable. So to check whether the data is stored inside this or not, let's try to print the variable. For printing the variables, we will not use single quote or double quote. We will just type the variable. Here when we run program, it is asking for the name. So now let's see what happened over here. When we entered our name, the name gets replaced with this part of the code, and this part of the code is stored inside this variable. And we have printed this variable. As a result, we got output as our name. So this is how we store the data inside the variable, and we saw how to get data from the user. So this was all for the day. In our upcoming episode, we are going to see what is data type in Python.